If you don't have the livestock below the soil, you really can't support the livestock above it. It's all part of a wonderful system.
Everything is intrinsically linked, that we can't separate when we talk about even ourselves, human health or animal health or soil health or ecosystem and planetary health.
I'm shouting at them about dung beetles. Someone else is shouting at them about moths. Someone else is shouting at them about bees, before they've even got on to anything else.
Keeping that soil covered is one of the best things that farmers can do.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Since launching the Farming Focus podcast in June 2023, we've explored a massive range of topics across the farming industry. But one subject that continues to come up time and time again is soil health. It's a conversation that remains just as important today. Last month, the government published its new farming roadmap, placing a clear focus on soil health and setting out actions, including a really exciting open access national soil data portal, a national soil monitoring baseline by 2029, and further support through the Sustainable Farming Incentive. But while policy and funding are important, understanding what's happening beneath your feet is just as valuable. So in today's episode, we're revisiting a conversation with entomologist Sally-Ann Spence and plant and soil health expert Joel Williams, which explored the hidden workforce beneath our fields, the animals and organisms carrying out some of the hardest work on your farm. From dung beetles moving nutrients to earthworms building soil structure and fungi performing remarkable work below ground, these unseen workers play a vital role in creating healthy, productive soils. So let's return to this episode of Farming Focus, first released in August 2024.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Sally-Ann, let's start with you. Can you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Okay, well, my name is obviously Sally-Ann. I'm a farmer from a farming family, and I've been working on British beetles, or dung beetles in particular, for nearly 30 years now. And I've been collecting a lot of data for our report. We founded a project called DUMP, which is the Dung Beetle UK Mapping Project, which was associated with the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, where we decided to go out and collect data to find out how dung beetles were doing. And I'm basically obsessed with the smallest livestock of all and travel around the British Isles working with farmers and looking at different livestock systems and surveying dung beetles. That's a big part of what I do. And I've helped set up something called Dung Beetles for Farmers, which enable a resource for farmers to access.
Great stuff. Thank you. Joel, same question to you. Could you just introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Yes, thank you very much. A pleasure to be here. And my name is Joel Williams from Integrated Soils. And I'm an independent plant and soil health educator. And I'm very lucky, very privileged enough to travel quite a bit around the world. I particularly work in Europe, Australia, and North America. And I run workshops and sessions for farmers, and we talk all sorts of things about soil and plant health, from its nutrition management side of things, but through to what we're also going to talk about here today, a bit of the biology and the life in the soil. Looking forward to the chat today.
Indeed. So thank you very much both. So Sally-Ann, why do you think it's so important that farmers should be considering livestock below the soil as much as those above it?
Healthy soil is full of life, and it's the livestock that's in the soil busy recycling all the material, the sort of living and dead material, into those nutrients for the plants to grow that support the animals, the livestock above the soil. They're helping with so much of the soil structure and everything else. If you don't have the livestock below the soil, you really can't support the livestock above it. It's all part of a wonderful system.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Joel, you speak with farmers and land managers all over the world. How would you characterise their sort of typical level of interest in all things soil related? And has that attitude changed over your career to date?
Absolutely. We are seeing a real renaissance into this topic at the moment. There's such interest in soil biology. And that is typically because if you do look back, the way we've managed soils traditionally for the last many decades has been very, very focused on the soil chemistry, on the soil physics. Even for me, 20 years ago in my Bachelor of Agricultural Science, we had a professor of soil chemistry and a professor of soil physics. We didn't even have one for biology, and we didn't even learn anything about beneficial biology, apart from pathology is the only thing we learned about. So I would say in the last 20 years, that has changed hugely, and there is great interest and uptake amongst farmers, etc., in this fascinating topic, and rightly so. There is a great need to protect our soils, not only from the point of that they are the foundation to any good farming business, and we need to keep soil on farms and out of waterways, etc., but also we need to conserve soil from the point of biodiversity conservation, because there is a huge repository of life and genetic information there in that fascinating underground world.
Yeah, for sure. And we just sort of touched on it there, and that's a really interesting point that you make about the balance between physics and chemistry, but also biology, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of the piece that we know less about, certainly. And that's what the implication would be from what you said about the setup of your professors at when you were studying. But what is soil biota? Why is it so crucial for soil health? And how is it linked to the livestock that it supports in the ecosystem above it?
Okay, well, that term soil biota, it really just refers to all of the life and all of the living things in the soil. And that starts from the micro-organisms, things such as bacteria and fungi, through to some of the micro-animals like protozoa or nematodes, and then all the way up to some of the other organisms that Sally is so passionate about, some of the insects, some micro-insects, some larger insects, and onwards up to our earthworms, and even, I guess we could even include plants that when they're alive in that soil, that they form part of that soil biota as well. So it refers to anything that is alive and living within that soil ecosystem. As Sally also rightly mentioned, they perform many, many really important functions, not only for productivity, for optimizing farmers' soil health in terms of nutrient cycling, making nutrients available to plants so that we can grow healthy pastures and healthy crops, but also in terms of they provide lots of other ecosystem services, so supporting the landscape function, the surrounding ecology in which our farms sit. So microorganisms and the biology play a role here in improving soil structure, and so that's really important for water infiltration, making sure that we get water into the soil and not water running across the soil where it will take soil with it and lead to soil erosion and ultimately degrade our ecosystem. So they're really important both for productivity and for ecological health. And that's why everybody needs to be taking an interest in the importance of the life in the soil.
Yeah, brilliant. So just a couple of pieces there from what Joel said, Sally-Ann, I'm going to come to you on to sort of see what your thoughts are on. So what I'm hearing is that the biota is like a city. It's full of diverse people of all different sort of shapes and sizes, and they all do different jobs and things like that. And then Joel's also talked about ecosystem services, and that's a phrase that we'll have heard quite a lot from politicians maybe over the last few years. But Joel got my attention there when he talked about water, because at the moment my cattle are out and I'm feeling that we're a little bit short of grass. We're recording this sort of in the second week of July. But actually, when I look at the Grass Check GB information, it says that we're a little bit short of water, and actually getting that water into our soils so that it's available for our plants to help them grow in drier spells would be a real benefit, wouldn't it? Sally-Ann, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, because, like Joel was saying, the soil biota is those microorganisms and the larger animals, the soil animals that are in the soil. It's not only how they're breaking down the material that they're eating, it's how they're moving around the soil and the tunnels and things that they're leaving behind. So, resilient soils, we need resilient soils. We're having these amazing changes in our climate, but we're getting right now, as you say, we're recording this in July, and we had a hailstorm last week that shredded the leaves on the fodder beet, and we've had so much rain. Even this morning we've had rain. We had 2 inches of rain only yesterday. It's ridiculous, So you need that water to go through the soil and drain away. That's really, really important. And also you need the soil on the drier periods, because we have these sudden real hot, really, really hottest, recorded week and all this sort of thing going on. You need that water to be retained in the soil as well. And all that tunneling helps with that. It's all part of making that soil more resilient to our climatical changes that we're going through.
Yeah. Yeah, okie dokie. So that phrase resilience comes back again. It's one that we hear again and again on this podcast, and yeah, definitely something that I think farmers are getting used to having to get their heads around.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
We talked there about the function of the different populations that are in the soil, but how can soil health link to the health of livestock, Sally-Ann? Can you sort of give us a bit of an understanding of how that interaction happens, please?
Well, the most simple way of putting it is that healthy soils grow really good plants that provide the nutrition for livestock. So if you've got good soils, you've got good, strong plants, you've got good, strong livestock. That's the most basic way of looking at it, really. The soil itself, as I said, is a living thing, and you've got all this going on inside it. You've got all that chemistry and biology and everything else. If you don't have that good, healthy soil, you simply can't get those nutrients available for plant root uptake. If you don't have your plants, you just can't run your animals out there. And then you start going into a different system where you're using artificial fertilizers and everything else. And then we're looking at things in the future. We're looking at the petroleum industry. And we saw recently how fertilizers went up through the roof in price, and all that sort of thing. So again, it's bringing it back to soil health being part of livestock health and in a resilient system.
That's really clear. Thank you so much for that. So, Joel, what research is there to sort of back this up, to sort of help us to understand sort of the web which links soil and plants and the livestock that they support?
Yeah, great question. I would say that in the last few years, there's been a framework, this topic called One Health is something that's emerged a little bit in the literature. And this is the idea that researchers are exchanging and expanding this idea that everything is intrinsically linked, that we can't separate when we talk about even ourselves, human health or animal health or soil health or ecosystem and planetary health. Whenever we talk about any of those things, we often have a tendency to talk about them in isolation. And so what this kind of One Health framework is trying to do is say, look, we need to be thinking a lot more holistically and look at that whole picture and explore those interactions and how these things interrelate and influence each other. And I think that, Sally pointed out the real obvious answer there is if nutrients are not available, if they're not cycling and available in the soil, they're not going to come up into the plants, into the pastures. Therefore, they're not going to come up into the animals, and they're not going to come up into us as well, equally. So there's another part to the One Health framework, which also is exploring the microbiome links. And it's also a fascinating area where we are beginning to understand that there are some microorganisms that exist in soils who also exist in plants, grow on and inside plants, who are then also grazed by animals and enter and live on and inside animals and equally inside us. And so there are some organisms that are common throughout that whole food web that we all share in common. And this is particularly among some of the microorganisms that I'm referring to here. And so there are some examples like that where we can really put a very, very direct link to say, well, okay, if these organisms are out of balance in the soil, how does that then translate through all the way up that food web, even through to the animal and even us as well? So there are some attempts to kind of look at that more holistically, and there's some interesting work happening in that space.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
So we've heard about the dung beetle, and they've been alluded to, but I can imagine some of our listeners are thinking, well, what's so special about dung beetles? So Sally-Ann, why are dung beetles specifically so important?
Right. Well, we'll start off with saying what's not special about dung beetles. Where to start? They are an incredible insect. And if you want to know how incredible they are, you've got me going now. Look at the cattle industry in places like Australia, where they imported cattle in massive numbers and they didn't have dung beetle species that could process that dung. So they do have dung beetles, but they process dung from marsupial animals, very dry, high organic content and everything else. Their whole system started to crash. Their industry started to crash because that dung was staying on the surface. And you had various things breeding in the dung, hide fly, buffalo fly, that having an economic impact on the animals. You had pollution because that dung was being washed around. It was sitting on the surface, so you had pasture fowl. All these things were going on, and none of that organic matter was being incorporated into the soil. So that's how important dung beetles are. They're a massive part of the livestock industry. So come over to us. What are our dung beetles doing? We're lucky. We have dung beetles, and they're active all year round, different species all year round. They're on a 24/7, 365 days a year recycling system for you. You're not having to pay them or anything. They're just kicking on with it. They're awesome. They're the best employees you've got on your farm. They do not stop. So what are they doing? Well, they're reducing methane in those dung pats. So that's not actually about the soil as such, but that's an important thing, especially when we talk about the cattle industry. And they reduce your parasites in your livestock and things like that. But that's, as I said, that's another awesome thing that dung beetles do, plus everything eats them, et cetera, et cetera. But what do they do for your soils? Well, they're taking that organic matter directly into the soil, making it available for earthworms and other things as well. They tunnel, so they're aerating the soil. We were talking earlier on about helping water either be retained or filtrating through the soil. They're reducing compaction, and compaction is a big problem. A big problem to our soils is compaction. And these guys are reducing it. They're mixing the topsoil and the subsoil. Some of them are tunneling down to a meter and a half, depending on the depth of your soils. There's just nothing that can do that sort of stuff for you. They're redistributing the bacteria and the fungi. They're just doing all these incredible things. They're just helping your soils so much, and people just aren't getting it. I've been banging on about dung beetles for 30 odd years now. They're awesome. They're just an incredible insect group.
Wow. So I'm convinced, Sally-Ann, that they are the best employee that I'll ever have. That's quite a pithy response, definitely. What more can farmers do to help their populations? You said that they're sort of all year round, but there's farmers that'll be listening to this that might be rotational grazing or might be thinking about going to it or out wintering. Do these actions help? Do they counteract the behaviour of dung beetles?
Well, first of all, if you've got livestock, you're brilliant, because we don't have livestock, we don't have dung beetles. The whole thing is in their name. They're dung beetles. So the first thing we need is livestock out there, and we need it out there as well. These things are interacting with dung when it comes out of the animal onto the ground, not in a muck heap and things like that for farmyard manure when you're muck spreading. That's a different community. These guys are just on the natural, straight away community. So we want livestock out, but we also would ideally need livestock out all year. And that's often very difficult because a lot of the schemes say reducing or removing livestock for 6 months a year over winter or whatever. And obviously you've got the offset of poaching and things like that. So it's about leaving some animals out. A bit of sheep is good. Let's mix our species up as well. I know not all cattle farmers like sheep, but sheep and cattle, great mixture that is. And they've got a diversity of species then, because you've got some that prefer sheep over cattle and vice versa, and some that are generalists. We would need to keep them all year round, ideally, because also we get these change in the temperatures now, this climate change, where you get these warm spikes in the spring, and that encourages species to come out, and there's no more dung for them. So that's another reason we want livestock out. But yeah, we want to reduce our treatments as well. I'm not going to say no treatments, because I don't think that's absolutely correct for animal welfare. I'm going to say let's reduce our treatments, reduce that soil disturbance, min-till, no-till, rather than heavy, ripping this ground apart, ploughing or anything. And it doesn't matter so much if you're, how you're grazing in a way, because these things can fly. All the adult beetles can fly. They come from an environment that is disappearing. So when the adult pupates, when the larvae pupates and emerges as an adult, it will naturally fly to find the dung. So they're traveling with the animals. They don't recognize your farm from your neighbor's farm or anything. They're just traveling. They're just finding dung. They're just getting on with the job. Like I said, the best employee. You don't even have to tell them what to do. They just get on with it every day.
Well, they sound more and more amazing, Sally-Ann. This is quite the little beastie.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Joel, I'm going to come back to you. Thinking more broadly about soil biodiversity, what are some practical things that farmers can do to improve the soil biodiversity?
Sure. I think, one of the classic things we often talk about is the use of organic amendments, composts, manures, these kind of soil conditioners. And I think that's one of where possible, where farmers have access and can use these types of inputs, they can be very useful. But I actually think stepping on the other side of that one is that we have this growing awareness of the importance of the biology in the soil. And that in like all food webs, that starts with some of those microorganisms and flows onwards and upwards through to the insects that Sally was talking about, and the earthworms and etc., some of the larger animals from there. And if we come back down to those at the base of that food web, the things like the bacteria and fungi, they really like to grow in very close association with living plants. And so this principle of keeping the soil covered with green plants, with these living roots. We hear of the soil health principle, living roots. I think this is one of the absolute fundamentals. And this is why, of course, grassland and perennial-based farmers have a bit of an advantage here because they have more permanent cover. And when they have that permanent cover, they have those permanent green leaves capturing sunlight, photosynthesizing, breathing in carbon and sending some of that carbon down to the roots and out of the roots to feed all of that living system in the soil. And so I think actually this living root soil health principle, just keeping that soil covered, is one of the best things that farmers can do, because that is really the preferred food source for some of those microorganisms. They love that liquid carbon, those root exudates that plants are exuding and dripping out of their root systems. This is a highly digestible form of carbon and energy for those microorganisms that they particularly love to feed on. So I think despite the complexity of this vast world that we've talked a little bit about in this morning's discussion, actually some of the rules of taking care of them, nurturing them, working with them can be quite simple. And one of the most simple things is just keep that soil covered with living plants and living roots.
What are the biggest obstacles to widespread adoption of practices that can support organisms below the soil and in turn, improving or regenerating that soil health? What are the big blockers?
There's a classic line that I'm sure many farmers have heard before, but this line that says something of the essence of, the biggest compaction problem that we have is the one in between the ears. And
I like that.
And sometimes it is those mindsets around approaching change. There is a fear of change. Many farmers have concerns and risks about this, and indeed many of us as humans suffer the same ills in many different contexts of our lives.
Yep.
And so I think it is about the right mindset to approach that process of change that it is absolutely so key, and key to supporting that and fostering that, I think, is peer-to-peer learning, farmer-to-farmer learning, and putting on field days, for example, on farms where farmers can come and see, look, talk, explore. This type of knowledge exchange is absolutely fundamental, and I think that really helps farmers unlock some of those blockages and gives them that opportunity for support, for questions, to see how others are doing it, learn from others, and go from there.
Sally-Ann, are we talking about the need for a fundamental shift when it comes to how farmers manage, or do we think we can see the improvements that can help with our soil biodiversity by making just sort of small, marginal improvements around the edges?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Very quickly, following on from Joel, farm cluster groups. Can I just say farm cluster groups have been amazing because they're enabling, scientists like me and my science, welly boot on, if you like, to have direct contact with the farmers and actually have that sort of discussion with them. Yeah. So what more can they do? I think farmers are trying to do things. They definitely are trying to do things. And in this scenario, because I'm obviously looking more at the livestock system rather than the arable cropping system. So, working with farmers to basically, first of all, one thing I need to do is do baseline data surveys and things like that with them. Because we just don't know. And because these are insects, I hate to say this, and I'm saying this as an entomologist as well as a farmer, people do tend to not have a value on insects because they're just bugs. They're little tiny things. They don't really have an impact on us as such until you get chased by a single wasp, or you suddenly realize how important earthworms are. Dung beetles are in that group. They're little tiny things, but they're hugely, hugely important. And they do have to have that value attached to them, that we don't attach them. We attach a value to an agronomist coming out and telling us what diseases we've got in our crops and things like that. But we don't attach any value to someone with an entomological background or, coming out and looking at the insect side of it.
This is something that I really want to touch on. Certainly, I know farmers who would view all insects as a pest, just generically. And I think probably that's because they're aware of, maggots in their sheep's feet or fleece, or, fly strike, or the flies bothering cattle, or worms, or liver fluke. And these are all problems. They are all pests in inverted commas. And actually, I don't know, but I don't know if that's a more recent way of viewing them. I'd be really interested to know what my great-grandfather thought of insects and bugs such that he was aware of. Would he have viewed them all as pests? We don't have an answer for that. But, how can we get around or away from this position of thinking of anything that's sort of smaller than an earthworm as being a nuisance? That, do you think, Sally-Ann?
It's very ingrained in our culture. That's the thing, that if you look back in time, cockchafers, maybugs, they were actually taken to court and told to leave the British Isles in the medieval period. This is the thing. We just think of problems with them, and it's getting that interaction with people. I'm hugely enthusiastic about this group because I know how important they are. I can see what they do, and it's really, really obvious. Our original soil scientists, if you like, were Gilbert White and Charles Darwin. It has been going on for some time, but we sort of ignored it. And now we're bouncing back into it and say, oh, hang on, these things are really cool. And it's like, yeah, they are cool, but we've lost loads of them, so we need to catch up. So again, it's going back to how do you get people enthused about it? You get connection with them. I use social media a lot, and then I actually, interact with people. And again, it's trying to do surveying and things like that. If I go out and I survey a farm, I get called in by farmers and landowners and NGOs and things to survey for dung beetles. And I go in and I do a baseline survey, and then I'm enable them to find out what they've got. And I can compare it to control sites I've got all around the UK. So I can see immediately whether they're below or doing well or whatever. But I have a line that we can start from. Then I can show them what those insects can actually do for them, because I can then help them make improvements, and then they can see the difference themselves. Farmers are flat out doing a billion things all day. And I get a lot of people from the science community saying, the problem is farmers don't take on, the understanding of these sort of things because they're not adaptable. They're not able to understand or whatever. It's not that. Farmers are the most adaptable, intelligent bunch of people out there. It's just they just don't have time to deal with all this stuff we're all shouting at them. I'm shouting at them about dung beetles. Someone else is shouting at them about moths. Someone else is shouting at them about bees, before they've even got on to anything else. Some people want them to have trees. I'd like them to have grassland. Some people want it, and so on and so forth. So they're dealing with all these people shouting about different things. We just need farmers to understand that these insects are hugely important. All of them are. Yes, you do have detrimental things, but let's understand the detrimental ones. Flea beetles, the amount of people that were spraying for flea beetles during the daytime when flea beetles are active at night. So have an understanding, please, about your insects, whether they're good or bad, however you vote them, have an understanding. And that is part of what I do, is get that understanding out there.
Brilliant. And so there's lots of places where we can find support. And Sally-Ann, you're available on Instagram on the handle at Sally-Ann Spence. That's ANN Spence.
More active on Twitter, to be fair.
Great. And so the Twitter handle is the same?
It's Sally-Ann_Spence. Yes.
Sally-Ann_Spence on Twitter or X. And Joel, you're at Integrated Soils, and that's on Instagram?
And Twitter as well. And I'm a bit more active on Twitter also.
Brilliant. So I push people towards Twitter to look at Sally-Ann_Spence and at Integrated Soils to find out what Joel's got to say.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
We come now to this episode's showstoppers. And the first thing that really hit me from what we've heard so far is that we've got to farm profitably. And I'm sure lots of our listeners will be nodding their heads at this point. There's no point farming in the green if you're not farming in the black, is a phrase that I've heard said before. But I think it's really important to focus on Sally-Ann's example on her own farm. By focusing on creating a habitat which was favourable below the soil, she was actually able to get more outputs from the land which those organisms supported. So it's really important to fix onto this and to hold that in our minds. It is possible to do this. Secondly, we've heard that a healthy soil grows healthy crops. So there's lots of principles that we talked about today, but not least making sure there are living roots in the soil all through the year, or at least for as long as you can ensure. Incorporating organic matter, whether that's dung or other humates or other additives like that. Having a diversity of species in the soil, so the different plants, these multi-species swards that we're particularly familiar with on grassland, and of course integrating livestock wherever possible. But finally, Joel said that the biggest compaction is often between the ears. It's a phrase that really resonates. The mindset, our openness to trying something, to change, is critical. So in order to help get our head around some of these ideas, do go to farm walks, do join farm cluster groups. But most importantly, just make a start. We've heard about the importance of having a benchmark or a baseline. So get your spade, go out and dig and count how many earthworms you've got. Understand your soil structure. Look at your roots. And, make sure that you are familiar with where you are now. But most importantly, just start something.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
That was Sally-Ann Spence and Joel Williams on managing the livestock beneath the soil. It's a conversation that, if anything, matters now more than when we first recorded it. No matter what you farm or how you choose to manage your land, seeing your soil from the perspective of what happens within it as an ecosystem can have a fundamental impact on how you think about your land and your business. If you want to go further, Sally-Ann and Joel have more from this conversation in a follow-up bonus episode, which you can scroll back and find searching for Series 3, Episode 5 bonus, Livestock Beneath the Ground. It's well worth digging into, pun very much intended. And if listening to this has changed how you'll look at the soil during your next field walk, please recommend it to someone who you feel would enjoy it too. Or if you just want to engage with the podcast, email us on podcast@cornishmutual.co.uk. You've been listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm Peter Green. We'll see you next time. And for now, it's goodbye from me and everyone in the Cornish Mutual podcast team.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.